Hey everyone, it's Kneecap here. In this video I'm going to be doing a guide for the second boss in 2-star Jairus, Demonic Inquisition, and this is going to be for heroic and normal difficulty. Demonic Inquisition is comprised of 2 bosses, and technically 3 if you count the other little phase that you can go into. So let's go ahead and just go through all the abilities and get this fight explained. The most important thing to know on this fight is about the Torment. Torment increases when attacks and abilities from Atragon and Bellic strike players. Players that reach full Torment are afflicted with unbearable torment and must confess in order to remove the effect. So basically, if you stand in things you're not supposed to stand in, hit things you're not supposed to hit, you'll get torment faster than what you normally would, and you'll have to use your special action button and go down to Belloc's cage, where there's an additional boss that you don't actually kill, and we'll get into that. But basically, you want to keep your torment down. In some cases, you may only have to confess maybe once or maybe 0 if you get very lucky. But you will most likely have to go and do that at one point, and we'll get to that. What unbearable torment is: the Inquisition has broken you. All damage done is reduced by 20%. Your chance to hit is reduced by 90%, and your healing is reduced by 25%. All damage taken is also increased by 90%. So basically, if you don't confess, you have to deal with that. You're basically just going to be a plague on your raid if you don't go out of that. The only thing I could say is I guess technically healers might be able to get away with it, since it's not a super healing intensive fight. And maybe they can heal at 75% effectiveness. Other than that, you really need to get this off you. You confess your actions against the Legion to the Demonic Inquisition and are transported into Belloc's Fell prison. So I guess we'll just talk about Belloc first, since I guess it was his prison that we're going to. Belloc is going to be a caster. Atragon's more of a melee. So at the beginning of the fight, you can start these 2 together. Basically, when they each get to 100 energy, they're each going to do a ability. Belloc's ability is going to charge faster than Atragon's. So if you just start with both the bosses together, you can pop Heroism, Bloodlust, whatever. At the start, you'll get a ton of DPS in on both of them with cleave damage, and you won't have to worry about it. When Belloc starts approaching 100 energy, you want to make sure that you move Atragon away from Belloc, and that way you don't have to worry about Belloc's ability, which we will get to now. First of all, he's going to be always casting Pangs of Guilt. If you can, you want to have an interrupt rotation on this. However, if you're always going to focus on Belloc when he's not doing his ability, everyone's on him and it should be interrupted. However, you just need to make sure he doesn't get out, because it hits for 2.5 million damage every time he gets one of those off. So if he was free casting those, it would probably be pretty devastating. Even though 2.5 million is not a ton compared to what our health is right now. You know, a little over half for very geared people. Echoing Anguish. Now this is important. This is a dispellable debuff. Belloc targets multiple players with phantasmal torture devices. Each inflict 341,390 shadow damage and 4 torment every 1 second for 12 seconds. When this effect is removed, nearby players are struck by Anguish Outbursts. What Anguish Outburst is: tormenting energy bursts forth from the affected player, inflicting 2.5 million shadow damage and 10 torment to players within 8 yards. So, if you can't guess what you need to do here, when you get Echoing Anguish, you need to run out of the raid. You can have a designated spot where to run to when you have this, and then the healer can safely dispel you, and you will not give torment to other players. You are going to get torment when you have this. This is when I said you might get lucky enough to where you don't get enough torment to have to go confess in the cage. If you're never inflicted with Echoing Anguish, you do have a chance of this if you're a DPS player. There's also Suffocating Dark. Shrouds a random player in Suffocating Darkness, inflicting 350,000 shadow damage and 10 torment every 1 second, and slowing movement speed by 50%. And Tormenting Burst. Tormenting energy explodes from Belloc, inflicting 1 million shadow damage and 4 torment to all players. Also, the Suffocating Dark, I should point out, is just darkness on the ground, so you just want to make sure you don't stand in that. Yeah. And then his main ability at 100 energy is called Squaw. Inflicts 2.7 million fire damage and 4 torment to nearby enemies, and 544,000 fire damage to all enemies every 2 seconds. If you attack Belloc during Squaw, you will get torment. So it's going to be an AoE around him. So melee, obviously, it's going to be instinctive to run out. However, range DPS, you need to make sure you're not hitting him too. According to my raid, if you have dots on him, that will not dots on him before he starts casting Squaw. It won't give you your, it won't affect your torment. If I'm wrong on that, feel free to point me out. But just try to avoid attacking him at all during Fell Squaw. As soon as he's done with Fell Squaw, what we do is we switch right back onto Belloc. The other thing I want to point out about Belloc is you don't actually tank Belloc. So you don't need a tank for Belloc. You're only tanking Atrigan, and then you're going to be tanking the Tormented Soul, which is what we'll get to last. So let's go ahead and talk about Atrigan. Atrigan has an ability called Bone Scythe. This is a tank ability. Atrigan wields a Bone Scythe. All attacks made by Atrigan apply to Torment. So he's going to be stacking Torment on you no matter what. This is when you're going to have to do a tank swap. Now you can either do this with 2 tanks or 3 tanks. 3 tanks just makes it kind of really easy because you're always going to have an extra tank floating. So that means you have a tank in the cage, which is what we're going to get to last. And you have a tank on Atrigan, and then you have a float tank kind of who can do whatever needs to be done. So if the tank switches a little bit sloppy, you can have another tank kind of, deal with that. The other thing is if you just have a really OP tank, you can still kind of leave a tank down in the cage for a long time by himself. But once you get to once you're fully marked with the debuff, I mean, it's going to be hard to live through that. The other abilities for Atrigan: Scythe Sweep. Atrigan swings his Mighty Bone Scythe, inflicting 4 million physical damage and 20 torment to all enemies in front of him. So again, you want to make sure that this is just a cleave. Make sure melee doesn't get hit by it. Calcify Quills is an interesting ability. Causes a barrage of spikes to emerge from the ground and cone towards a player. Players hit by a spike suffer 2 million physical damage or are knocked into the air. You'll see him turn most likely if he's faced away from the raid, and he's going to turn towards the player to shoot these quills at. Now, range, you guys just need to split away from that player, figure out who to split away from. Melee, you really need to move. At my rate, a lot of melee were getting hit by this a lot. I probably even got hit before by this. You really need to move out of the way when he does that. Go to his sides, keep DPSing, and then let him turn back around when he's done casting it. His special ability when he's to 100 energy is Bone Saw. It's very similar. It's going to be an AoE. The only difference is he can technically move, so you're going to want to make sure he stays away from the raid during this. He inflicts 2.7 million physical damage and swirls around in circles, basically. The other thing I want to point out now, before we get to the cage part, is that somewhere in this fight, they're both going to be about 0 energy again. At that point, if you can bring them both together again, you'll get the maximum amount of DPS you can do. Maybe that's a little bit more advanced. It's always safer to keep them split apart a little bit. But if you bring them back together at that point, when they're both near 0 energy again, you will definitely maximize your DPS there. Now let's go ahead and talk about the cage. I saved the cage for last just because it's not very difficult, at least on heroic difficulty, and definitely not a normal. Basically, there's just this massive soul has coalesced within Belloc's cage, and what he's going to do is he's going to do Tormented Eruption. So again, you get into the cage when you get your torment's maxed out. You use your special action button, and now you're in the cage. So there's going to be Tormented Eruptions hitting the ground. Those are just little swirlies. Don't stand on them. They hit you. And then there's going to be Soul Corruption, so there's going to be a dot that he puts on you that if you stayed in the cage too long, you will eventually die because your dot will get too high. Now, to get out of the cage, this is important. This is probably the most important part of the cage is you have to hit the boss, or the little mini boss, or whatever, the Tormented Soul, and little orbs will come on the ground. You need to collect those orbs, and then you can hit the special action button. Once your torment's completely gone, you hit a special action button, and that brings you back into the fight. And I believe you spawn on Belloc when that happens. So you don't want to come up during Fell Squaw. if you can help it, you don't want to come back up during Fell Squaw because you probably will be standing in it. So again, just go over the fight real quick. Begin the fight, bring them together, pop your heroism / bloodlust, do as much damage as you can. Pull them apart for the first Fell Squaw. Everyone switch to Atrigan. When Atrigan's going to do, or actually when Fell Squaw is over, just go ahead and get back on Belloc. At any point when their energies are both back down to 0 again, bring them back together again, or even near 0, 20 and 0. You know, that's fairly close. Bring them back together. Don't stand in things. If you do get full torment, just go to the other, go to the cage and get out of your torment and get back into the fight. Tanks, make sure you're swapping properly. Don't ever take too many stacks if you don't die. If you are having trouble with tanks, try the 3 tank strategy. It's not needed, but it does make it really easy if you do 3 tanks because you have that float tank. Healers is pretty straightforward for you. Not too hard of a fight for you unless your tanks get too high stacks. Hopefully I went over everything in this. If you have any questions, comment below. Any corrections, correct below. And everyone have a good one.